Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new episode of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. Let's begin with the headlines. Egyptian court sentences 683 Brotherhood supporters to death for assaulting and murdering policemen last summer. UN condemns mass death sentences. Egypt rejects criticism of sentences. International Monetary Fund approves $17.1 billion bailout for Ukraine to help the country's beleaguered economy. Loan comes amid heightened military and political tension between Ukraine and neighboring Russia. 5 killed in attacks across Egypt, policemen and a soldier among dead. Attacks come just weeks ahead of the country's key presidential elections. And famous United Buddy Bears exhibit finds its way to the shores of Rio de Janeiro just in time for the 2014 Soccer World Cup. The painted bears represent 141 different countries and stand side by side to symbolize a vision for world peace. A judge in Egypt on Monday sentenced the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood and 682 supporters to death in a mass trial. The ruling follows the murder of a policeman and several acts of violence linked to deadly riots that erupted across the country last summer. Hundreds of people were killed when security forces disbanded sit-ins by Brotherhood supporters loyal to ousted President Mohamed Morsi. His supporters have faced a violent crackdown since he was forced from power in July. Here's a detailed report.
An Egyptian court's decision to sentence 683 alleged Muslim Brotherhood members, including the group's leader Mohammed Badi, to death drew criticism both in Cairo and abroad for the speed at which the case was tried. The defendants, who were accused of inciting violence and murdering a policeman in the town of Al Adwa in Egypt's southern province of Minya last year, were sentenced following a trial that lasted only minutes. The accused were not present during the trial and their lawyers did not present any defense.
We're here to make sure and see if justice can be done in these hearings and people get fair trials where all the evidence is out there, where they can explain their situations, or the government would have to prove them, as we say in the United States in criminal cases, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So you have to show evidence, and it sounds to me like if you can convict one person, 500 people or more of injuring or killing one policeman, it's ridiculous.
Family members were shocked by the sentence and claimed they only want security forces to give their loved ones a fair trial. The cases follow a violent crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood since the ousting of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi last July. Hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested. Hundreds of the group's alleged supporters have already been sentenced to death in similar mass trials.
شيء طبيعي بتحكم بأقصى العقوبة إذا لم يحضر المتهم ولا محاميه عنه فبيحكم بالإعدام بأشد العقوبة، فإذا يعتبر الحكم ده غيابي فيجوز نقض ذلك الحكم وزي ما هتتخذ الإجراءات فيه برضه زي الحكم بتاع مطار. وبالتالي لن ينفذ. لا لن ينفذ، هو الوقت غير لا ينفذ.
Meanwhile, Egypt has voiced rejection of the criticism of mass death sentences to the Muslim Brotherhood supporters, terming it unacceptable interference in judicial affairs. The Grand Mufti, Egypt's top Islamic authority, will now review the sentences. A final decision is due in June.
Senior journalist Waiel Awwad, who is also an expert in Middle Eastern affairs, joins us in our studio. Welcome to the show, Waiel. And in fact, we've seen that, this particular judge, in the month of March, he went ahead and sentenced 529 men to death. And now in April, on the 28th of April, just 5 days ago, in fact, he goes ahead and sentences another 683 men to death. What's happening here?
Well, I think this is the first decision has been taken by the court. It's not the final decision. But that is, having said that, it doesn't mean that he has not read the 5,000 argument that they have, pages that they have written it, and has been discussing all what these have been doing atrocities against their own citizens, against their own people, whether it is in the, attacking a jail, whether it's attacking the Christian minorities in the country, whether attacking government or public installation. So all these have been seen by the judges, and they have given the sentence. They want wanted to give a lesson to the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood followers, especially the militia or the military wing of Muslim Brotherhood, that there will be a harsh decision on any person who violate the law of the land, because Egypt is heading for trouble if they don't take a strict action to prevent any kind of falling downward toward anarchy, because that is what worries the army of Egypt.
But strict action should be on both sides, because let's not forget, these men have been prosecuted because one policeman was killed and because of the violence that erupted last summer. Let's not forget, there are several other civilians who were killed as well. Why not action against the forces that were involved in this brutal attack?
No, but you see, they have attacked the churches. How many churches they have burned? How many government public property has been destroyed? All these are part of a systematic action carried by the military wing of Egypt. It's not an event which is abruptly, suddenly. We have been talking on this for a long time, that the Muslim Brotherhood have been arming themselves to the neck. They have smuggled enough arms from Libya after the military intervention in Libya, allowed the Muslim Brotherhood to carry weapons, even from Turkey, from across the border from Sudan. All this arm was for what? Your intention is preparing for a war against the current military regime in Egypt. Therefore, the Egyptian army has to restore law and order in the country and prevent further downfall. I would say that this decision is maybe a little bit harsh, but wait, let's see what will be. There will be follow-up, there will be an appeal. There is not going to be any kind of an execution by the Egyptian, because the Egyptian government also knows that the international community, human rights group are watching their decision. But the unfortunate part in Egypt now, what we are witnessing is the political conflict for the chairs or for the ruling in the country become a kind of a juristic kind of fighting in the court. And that is the different changes, and this should not be there, because the political differences should be decided by the ballot, and let the ballot decide who will rule the future of Egypt, not by a minority government which was dismissed by the army because of the popular demand of removing them of their wrongdoing. I think that is the differentiation we have to do between the juristic regime and also the political regime, which should be decided by the ballot on the future of Egypt.
Well, the ballot is going to decide the future of Egypt in a few days from now. Of course, elections are just around the corner. So do we see a lot more of this happening up until the elections?
We expect so much of things happening in Egypt because there are lots of disruption. People, look, radicalism bring extremism. Extremism bring terrorism. Why? I will draw your attention to one thing very important. Why all the Guantanamo detainees were in Afghanistan taken to Guantanamo by the US, released, and now they found their way into Syria? Because radicalism is already been nourishing in the region, and you are allowing them to go and fight, and they are ready to kill themselves. Therefore, if you do not have a strong action and strict measure to make sure that the country does not go into anarchy, you will end up like what happened in Iraq, what's happening in Syria, or what's happening now in Libya. Therefore, I think the Egyptian army realized the danger of, it's the largest and the most populous country in the Arab world, and if they don't take strict action against the extremists in the country, I think the country will be headed for more trouble.
But is an iron fist the only way to deal with the problem?
No, not at all. They have all the institutions, they have democratic up system, they have all the civil rights to do all their work. They have been following up the cases. There is no denial of trial of them. But the problem is that, as I said, it has become more of a mixing of the legal issues with the political issue, which is more seen in the Egyptian now on the political scene, because it's the election time coming. But I think as long as the jurisdiction system the jury is still independent, is not influenced, I think they can play a major role in retaining and ensuring the restoration of law and order in Egypt.
How much of a role will the Grand Mufti have in all of this? I mean, the ultimate power is with the Grand Mufti, of course, and a final decision, a final review is due in June. Do we see this particular sentence being carried out?
I don't think so. I think the Grand Mufti realized the sentiment of the people in the street of Egypt. At the same time, also will take on consideration the civil society, what they are really expecting from this kind of measurement, because 365 days of Morsi government have really created fear among the public of Egypt that if this was the Islamic or this was the alternative to 30 years rule of Hosni Mubarak, they were against this type of changing of polarization of the society. We noticed the polarization of the society in Egypt during the government ruling, where they wanted to give it one color, and then after the dismissal of the government, then we realize now the people of Egypt are rallying behind the government, behind their Sisi, because they wanted to change, they wanted more democratic process to take place rather than heading to anarchy, because they are witness to what's happening around you in Sudan, in Syria, and Yemen. All the area is becoming into turmoil. So, and going into anarchy will not serve the purpose of any country.
Indeed, of course, going into anarchy will not serve the purpose of any country. But the UN has now come ahead and has come out and said that the sentences, or the mass death sentences, have been criticized by the UN and the world community as well. Do you see some kind of an intervention now from the UN and from the world community?
I don't think so. The international community will intervene, because ultimately the decision will take some more time, when it will not be an execution as I understood from our Egyptian friends on the ground. But what is the general feeling that the international community is building the pressure, whether it's in the United States, who wanted to cut the 1.5 billion aid to Egypt, which was annually there because they are calling it a military coup and all. And then secondly, you have certain country of the vested Arab country like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the Emirates, who have been supporting the military or the government of Egypt by giving more than $12 billion to them. At the other hand, you have the Qatar, which is sabotaging and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood along with Turkey. So therefore, there is a kind of a conflict which can be seen in the international community as a kind of an intervention in the internal affair of Egypt. But at the end of the day, I don't think so. The Egyptians are well aware. They are able to sell their case to the international community that they are a victim of terrorists, and they are a victim of radicalism and extremism, which has been nourished for the last 1 year, and even nourished earlier, when they have been supported and trained and armed to do something against the country, which can be very dangerous for the integrity of Egypt if it is not put an end to it.
And violence has been a major problem in Egypt. Of course, there was a lull in between. Now violence has erupted again just before the elections. We've seen 5 people being killed. That is on Friday, of course. Do we see a lot more of that now?
There are lots of attacks happening in Egypt. We do not hear much about it, whether it is in Sinai Peninsula, whether it is inside Egypt. Egypt is a huge country. The attack has been on for some time and could be also flaring up during the election, because you have 2 camps. A camp which is supporting pro-Morsi. They don't want the election. They're calling it illegitimate. They have a legitimate president who was dismissed. And you have the other most popular people, the majority of the people, I would say, and the secular forces, including a layman of Egypt. They wanted a kind of a peace. So they are looking for an alternative for a government with a constitution that can preserve the right of equal among all the parties. Otherwise, if we do not take this kind of steps by the army and by the civilian government in power, it has to be a civilian. Army has to step back out of ruling of Egypt if really wanted to see a true democracy there. And I think that is the only steps they should ensure: a fair election, a constitution, and then you can see the people of Egypt able to come out from this crisis. Otherwise, with external intervention, we may be heading for more trouble, and that's what makes me more pessimistic, actually.
Well, very interesting there what our guest is saying. Of course, at this point in time, the army needs to take a step back and the civilian government needs to take control of the situation. Thank you so much, Waiel, Awwad, for joining us on the show, World Panorama, and sharing your perspective on this particular subject. We'll slip into a short break right now, but on the other side, we'll take a look at the International Monetary Fund's bailout package for struggling Ukraine. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the International Monetary Fund's board signed off a $17 billion 2-year program for Ukraine on Wednesday. The program, however, faces geopolitical risks along with uncertainty about the government's ability to carry out the politically unpopular measures necessary to get its finances in order. Here's a report. The International Monetary Fund has approved a $17.1 billion bailout for Ukraine to help the country's beleaguered economy. The loan comes amid heightened military and political tension between Ukraine and neighboring Russia.
urgent action was necessary. Decisive measures were taken by Ukraine, and decisive measures have just been taken by the IMF. So there has been a very strong endorsement for the program, which will release over the course of the next 2 years $17.1 billion in different installments over the course of those 2 years.
The aid will unlock further credits from other donors of about $15 billion intended to help Ukraine stabilize its economy amid its worst civil turmoil since independence in 1991. The decision from the IMF's 24-member board, which includes representatives from Russia and the United States, clears the way for an immediate disbursement of $3.2 billion to Ukraine's cash-strapped government. Of that first tranche, $2 billion will be targeted at supporting the budget.
We believe that Ukraine has an opportunity to seize the moment, to break away from previous practices, both from a fiscal, from a monetary, and from a governance point of view.
Pro-Moscow separatists seized government offices in more Ukrainian towns on Wednesday. Further sign authorities in Kiev are losing control of the country's eastern industrial heartland bordering Russia. The unrest in the east follows months of upheaval from anti-government protests and Russia's subsequent annexation of the Crimea region, which had already edged Ukraine's economy to the brink of bankruptcy. Ukrainian authorities have said that the economy will likely contract by 3% by the end of this year as a result of the chaos and mismanagement. Economic output fell 1.1% in the first 3 months of the year. The political unrest makes it even more difficult for Ukraine to get its economy back into shape, even though the country's new government pledged to pursue politically unpopular reforms as a condition for receiving IMF aid.
It's a program which has implementation risks. It's one where we are trying to mitigate the risk as much as we can. We have had prior actions which have been addressed satisfactorily. We will have what I would call high-frequency review, because there will be review of the performance every 2 months in the first sequence, in order to make sure that that determination is actually followed through.
The IMF expects Ukraine to implement major reforms in its energy and financial sectors, including raising the price of gas for domestic consumers. The government in power until elections on May 25th has already promised to raise gas prices more than 50%. Well, suicide bombings in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula hit a police checkpoint and a passenger bus, and 2 bombings in Cairo killed at least 5 people on Friday, a day before the start of campaigning in the country's presidential election. In the May election, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the now retired army chief who led last summer's overthrow of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, appears poised to win on a wave of nationalistic fervor. Posters by his supporters around Cairo tout El-Sisi as a strongman in the fight against terror. The violence first flared in Sinai, where several Al-Qaeda-inspired groups have long operated, but in the past months it has moved into Egypt's heartland in the Nile Delta and into the capital, Cairo. Militant groups have said that the attacks are in retaliation for the ferocious security crackdown since Morsi's ouster that has killed hundreds of his Islamist supporters and arrested thousands more. Well, let's now bring you up to date with the other international news in our special segment, Global Watch.
A federal judge in New York has dismissed a case filed against the Congress Party for its alleged role in the 1984 anti-Sikh riots. Earlier this week, Judge Robert Sweet granted the party's motion to dismiss the lawsuit brought against it by the Sikhs for Justice advocacy group. The group sought damages stemming from the Congress's alleged responsibility for the riots that engulfed New Delhi and other parts of the nation in violence following the assassination of erstwhile Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. The US Pentagon, in a report to the Congress, has praised the Indian contribution in the peaceful development of Afghanistan. India, it said, continues to support Kabul, believing a secure and stable Afghanistan will benefit the region and facilitate economic corridors into Central Asia. India and Afghanistan signed a strategic partnership declaration in 2011 which formalized cooperation on governance, economics, commerce, education, public administration and security. It informed the Congress on Wednesday. Severe floods in Florida's Panhandle and coastal Alabama deluged roads and engulfed homes and cars on Wednesday. The latest mayhem created by a tornado-packing storm system that has killed at least 34 people in the United States this week. Emergency workers received about 300 calls for evacuations in Panhandle, where up to 22 inches of rain fell in recent days. The flooding appears to be the worst in 30 years in Panhandle. Schools and roads were closed in several Panhandle counties, where emergency officials used boats and high-water vehicles to rescue stranded motorists and residents. 3 people were killed and dozens injured in what state media say was a terrorist attack involving knives and explosives at a railway station in the capital of Western China's Xinjiang region on Wednesday. The attack took place hours after President Xi Jinping used a rare tour there to demonstrate his government's commitment to combating terrorism. Assailants attacked people with knives at the station exit. Explosives were detonated at the same time, injuring at least 79 people.
Well, let's now bring you a roundup of the world's sporting stories in our special segment Sports Wrap. Australia have reclaimed the #1 Test ranking for the first time in 5 years following their Ashes whitewash of England and a series defeat of South Africa. Australia also remained the top-rated one-day international side in the latest official rankings from the International Cricket Council. It is the first time since December 2008 that Australia have been ranked #1 in Tests and ODIs at the same time. They last held the top Test ranking in August 2009 when they were displaced after losing the Ashes 2-1 to England. Darren Lehmann's Australians nudged out South Africa, who had held the top spot since August 2012. Pakistan's Cricket Board Chairman Najam Sethi has said that the country's cricket governance structure is set for a major overhaul, with the post of the chairman to be reduced to a ceremonial one. For long, the PCB chairman has been directly appointed by the patron-in-chief, which was until recently the Pakistan president, and thus he enjoyed absolute power and authority and could do anything as he liked. This year's Champions League final will be an all-Madrid affair, the first ever all-city match in the tournament's history after Atletico Madrid crushed Chelsea 3-1 in an absorbing contest at Stamford Bridge on Wednesday night. Atletico will now meet Real Madrid in Lisbon on May 24th after Diego Costa scored the winner on the hour mark from the spot. Adrian Lopez and Arden Turan added to the tally in what ended up as a rout. The result sets up a fascinating final. Atletico and Real are 1-2 in La Liga, and they have been the best two teams in this tournament all along. Real Madrid reached their first Champions League final in 12 years with a historic 4-0 win over holders Bayern Munich at the Allianz Arena on Tuesday in the second leg of their semi-final clash. Having won last week's first leg 1-0 in Madrid, Real won the semi-final 5-0 on aggregate as Pep Guardiola's Bayern suffered their heaviest home defeat in European competition. Dani Alves has slammed Spain for being very backward and has said that the fan that hurled a banana at him should be publicly shamed. At the match against Villarreal, when Alves went to take a corner kick, a racist fan hurled a banana at him. The Brazilian player kept his calm and ate the banana, but now he expresses his anger and says that he would put the racist fan's photo on the internet so that he is publicly shamed. Well, the famous United Buddy Bears exhibit has found its way to the shores of Rio de Janeiro just in time for the 2014 Soccer World Cup. The painted bears represent 141 different countries and stand side by side to symbolize a vision for world peace. I'm going to leave you with these visuals. Enjoy them, and I'll see you again, same time, same place next week.